Welcome to the channel. Today, let's make gluten-free chocolate donuts. These donuts are a cake-style donut that gets baked, and then once it's cooled, we're gonna put on a sweet glaze. I'm Jamie with SavorySaver. I share gluten-free recipes, tips, tricks, and resources to make your gluten-free lifestyle easier. So please consider hitting subscribe, and let's get started. This recipe comes from the gluten-free website, glutenfreebaking.com. The instructions look super easy to follow, nothing difficult at all. In regards to the ingredients, there's nothing unusual that you probably don't have easy access to, either in your cabinet already or at the grocery store. It uses individual gluten-free flours, and I think we're just gonna jump right in. You are gonna need a donut pan since we are baking these, and I will link below to something affordable if you don't have donut pans. Or if you do have donut pans, it gives you a reason to pull them out of the cabinet. For the recipe, we're gonna mix up the batter and then we're gonna let it sit for 5 minutes. That's gonna allow everything to hydrate. I have everything pretty much measured out for the recipe because I don't think this is gonna be a difficult one where you guys need a ton of instruction with it. So I'm gonna turn my oven on to 375 degrees Fahrenheit so that can preheat. That way it'll be ready when we are. So to a large bowl, I've got 3/4 of a cup of oat flour. Make sure your oat flour is gluten-free because oats, as most of you know, is big cross-contamination issue for some people. So you want 3/4 of a cup of gluten-free oat flour, 1/2 cup of granulated sugar, and 1/4 of a cup of either tapioca starch or potato starch. I'm using tapioca starch today just because I usually have that in the cabinet and it's a little easier for me to find than potato starch in the grocery stores. To those items, I'm gonna add 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, and I am gonna sift it because my cocoa powder is full of lumps. So I'm gonna sift that into there just to break up all the lumps. See all of those? I wanna break that all up. And even though I'm gonna whisk it together with the other stuff, these just are not gonna break up well. Okay, cocoa powder's in there. Let's add the final dry ingredients. We're gonna add 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda and 1/4 teaspoon of xanthan gum. Now let's give everything a whisk and pay attention to your oat flour. If it's lumpy like mine is, it wasn't as bad as the cocoa powder, but just make sure everything's whisked together nicely. So now that everything's whisked together, let's put this to the side for just a moment and get our wet ingredients ready. For the wet ingredients, you're gonna need 1 large egg, 6 tablespoons of sour cream, and this is full fat, 1/2 teaspoon vanilla extract, 1/4 cup of milk, and 1/4 cup of oil. I'm just using vegetable oil or canola oil. You don't want anything that has a lot of flavor. So I'm just gonna measure it in here so it's ready to go. Let's get our wet ingredients into the dry. Our egg, milk and oil, vanilla extract, sour cream. Whisk everything together until smooth. All right, everything's mixed together, batter's nice and smooth, so I'm gonna let it sit for 5 minutes and then we'll move forward getting it into our pans and getting them in the oven. It's been 5 minutes and our batter has definitely thickened up a little bit. So I think I'm gonna do the whole storage bag trick as far as getting it into the donut pans to hopefully make it easier. So I'm gonna scrape it all into that. I've got my 2 donut pans here. This should make 12 donuts. I lightly sprayed it with cooking spray, and now I'm gonna fill up each cavity about halfway with the batter. So everything's been filled about halfway up. I am gonna clean up the drips. Now I'm gonna put them in the oven for about 10 minutes. You want them to start to spring back when you touch them. So we'll set the timer for 9 to 10 minutes, check them, and then we'll let them cool completely before we make our glaze. So here are the finished donuts. They do spring back a little bit. And I've also done the toothpick test, and I know that's not always a sign of things being done, especially when gluten-free, but I'm not getting anything on the toothpick. So I think we're probably pretty good. So I'm gonna turn these out onto the cooling rack, let it cool completely, and then we'll glaze them. So I had a little bit of sticking on a couple of them. We are using starches in here. That's probably part of the reason. So lightly coating your donut pans is a must. Let's get these cooled off so we can finish them up. So our gluten-free chocolate donuts have cooled down. So now we need to glaze them. So to a small bowl, I've got 1.5 cups of powdered sugar. And powdered sugar gets super lumpy when it's in a container. So I am sifting it to get all those lumps out. The other thing with the lumps is that it just won't mix as well into the glaze. So if you sift it, you're gonna have an easier time mixing everything together. To the powdered sugar, I'm gonna add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. We're also gonna add 6 tablespoons or 3 ounces of milk. And I'm gonna add most of it, I think, and whisk it, and then I'll add the rest if I need it, because sometimes glazes, just depending on how fast they mix up, sometimes they're too thick or too thin. And let's see, sometimes they whisk for me and sometimes I have to use a spoon. It just depends on how picky everything is being. Now I added 5 ounces of milk, so that was about 4 tablespoons. And it's pretty thin, so I'm not gonna add the additional. I'm gonna dip one and see what it does, because I don't think it needs it. So I've got my glaze and my cooling grid over here, and I've got it over a sheet pan. You can line this with parchment paper or plastic wrap or something if you want, just to keep it a little less messy. I'm the one doing the dishes. I'm just gonna rinse it off with some hot water and then soap it up. So I'm actually just gonna let it all drip into the pan. So I'm gonna dip it top side, which originally was the bottom of the donut when it was baking. So I'm gonna dip it on this side. I am gonna dip it all the way around. I think that that glaze is gonna help seal in the moisture in these donuts. So we're gonna let the excess drip off. Now I've got it placed over here on the rack so the glaze can harden. That's gonna take a few minutes. So let's get the rest of these dipped. So the donuts are all coated. Now I'm gonna let them firm up a little bit. I want that glaze to harden on there so it's less messy. And then this little sad one in the back that broke on me when I was taking them out of the pan, that's the one I'm gonna try. So the donuts are ready to try, and just a couple things on them. First of all, this one is glazed a little heavier and it actually looks better than this one. So I like the heavier glaze. The other thing is the bottoms are still not set. So once the first side sets, flip them over and let the second side set, because they've been setting a good 30 minutes and the tops are finally set. So the bottoms need to set as well. So definitely let all that stuff set, because if you don't, it's gonna be a sticky mess. They are pretty soft. This one broke just by me picking it up, and that was the one that was originally stuck to the pan. So let's give it a try. Said the bottom's not set, but that's okay. They're nice and dark. Nice chocolatey look to them. So taste-wise, they're pretty good. They taste like a chocolate donut. They are baked through. The glaze is not my favorite, and that's a preference thing, guys. I'm not a big glaze person on things. I just don't always like the taste of powdered sugar mixed with milk or water. So the glaze is actually not my favorite part of this donut, but again, preference thing. If you're okay with glazes, then by all means, you're gonna be okay with this recipe. I like the cakiness of it. I really like that it's baked through. They didn't bake long, they were a 10-minute bake. They cooled off really quickly. I would be okay without the glaze. Okay, so I finished the donut. So even with the glaze not being my favorite, must not be a bad thing for me to finish the whole thing. Let's go over a few things with the recipe, we don't have much to go over though. Easy recipe to follow direction-wise, simple ingredients, only a couple gluten-free flours, gluten-free oat flour, and tapioca starch or potato starch, whichever you want to use. A little bit of xanthan gum to hold everything together. I literally put it together in 10 or 15 minutes. I had to get out the ingredients and all that, but on camera, it really didn't take any time once everything was together. I did let my ingredients warm up just a little bit. I took them out of the fridge for maybe 15 minutes or so, just to take the chill off them. The sour cream, the egg, and the milk. You don't need them super cold going into that batter. They incorporate better when they're closer to room temp. In regards to storage, the original recipe says to store them covered at room temperature and they should last about 3 days. That's not a bad time for something that's gluten-free. It shouldn't really dry out, and that sugar glaze over the top should actually really hold some of that moisture in my opinion. So I think 3 days is a good time. It only makes a dozen, so not a whole lot to get through anyway. Again, you are gonna need donut pans for this, but they're not super expensive. They're probably $15 to $20 at the most for a decent set. I actually have Wilton. They are non-stick and they are not super expensive, so I will link to those below if you want to check out donut pans if this is something you're going to use. Guys, that's all I have for today. I need to go wash up a little bit and do a few dishes. Please leave me your comments below. Do you have donut pans? Do you not have donut pans? Do you make gluten-free donuts? What kinds? I'd love to hear the comments as well as your questions. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.